Greetings all, Dr. Raphael X here with another video with my friend here, Jeremy, to talk about another profound philosophical topic. And on this channel, we talk about different philosophical topics from different perspectives. We also we have our theological segment in English or in Spanish. And yeah, click on the subscribe button, share this video, all that good stuff. Leave a comment, and yes, let's get to it. So today's topic, we're going to discuss rationalism versus, or rather idealism, which idealism is the metaphysical view of reality. So rationalism is the epistemological view. So rationalism and idealism, they do go hand in hand. So I wasn't that wrong. So idealism versus realism and the moral implications. Like, what does that mean for us morally? Because everything is underlined by a philosophy. So, and even science. So scientists who pretend to be against philosophy are philosophers. You cannot get away from philosophy. So we'll see the moral implications of these two really antithetical views. So basically, idealism very basically says that ideas exist, or nothing exists, no physical objects exist. There's nothing really truly extramental that exists, physical objects, what have you. Everything is kind of dependent on experience for their existence. And then we have realism, which some would can think of it as a naive realism, which is not. And it's an interesting quote I just want to mention here. And the realism basically says that reality exists. There's extramental things that exist. And I love that word things, because it's very, some people, grammatically speaking, it's not acceptable, right? In many different, we can say, bodies of knowledge. But in philosophy, it's a very metaphysical thing, entity, being. So I just want to quote Einstein here. The more plebeian illusion of naive realism, according to which things are as they are perceived by us through our senses, dominates the daily life of men and of animals. So, let me finish the quote. It is also the point of departure in all of the sciences, especially of the natural sciences. So, people who are kind of diminishing the value, not this, I don't want to say despising, but diminishing the value of a naive realism, do not realize that this is the basis of science. This is the basis, as we're going to see, of morality, of reasoning. But it is true that naive realism, I think what a lot of people mean by naive realism is that you kind of stay there and you don't go in depth. You don't realize the hidden, profound, immutable reality that's within that underlies, we can say, the what we perceive passively, right? We have to be more proactively to kind of extract that. So we'll be talking about these topics also. Rationalism, basically how rationalism, we need to tend a little bit more towards rationalism, because the effects of postmodern irrationalism has affected us tremendously, has made morality totally relative and subjective, and we need to go a little bit towards rationalism. And we'll be explaining these and all that. But yeah, chime in here, Jeremy, and take the conversation where you would like to lead it.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, let's think about a entrance point to these extensive kind of fields of thought. One thing we could say is that any such conversation begins with what is called self-consciousness. When we study and observe and think about animals and insects, the inference of sentience seems entirely warranted. There's a lot of deer in these areas. So if we're driving along and we honk at a deer and it runs, kind of the explanation is that that auditory signal was experienced. It became an aspect of some experience. A further kind of reason to think that would be perhaps that in our overall experience, there are certain things that have the possibility of intelligibility, and there's other things that have the possibility of influence vis-a-vis their immediate presentation. What does that mean? So if I place a picture, let's say, of your relative in front of a mirror, the mirror does not need to know who that relative is in order to reflect it, correct?
Right. Yep.
It's going to reflect it, right? I place it before a camera. The camera is going to take a picture, presumably because a picture of your relative has the possibility of influencing other like material in the world, such as the camera lens, such as the mirror, uh, as it concerns immediate presentation, right? As it concerns the visual and tangible aspects of that picture. But the picture also has an intelligible aspect to it, which is you understand it to be your relative, right? We're speaking right now, and our words have the possibility of, again, that immediate influence, which can be called mechanical, just to use that term correctly or not. And therefore, our words can impact audio recorders such as this. Right? They can impact magneticized metals such as exist in computer processors, but they also have intelligible aspects, which means they can impact minds. Right? What I say, if you, insofar as you understand it, it doesn't just impact you mechanically, it impacts you intelligibly. You understand what these words mean, right? What ideas they point to. So when we say, or let's say, uh, a bee which collects pollen, right? Can pollen impact the bee mechanically? Can pollen mechanically force a bee to collect it? Right? Let's say that I'm out and about and the mosquitoes are attacking me. So I take some bug spray and I spray it and the mosquitoes bounce. Did that mechanically impact the mosquitoes, do you think? Or did that intelligibly, there we go, impact the mosquitoes? What do you think, Professor?
Uh,
Not to put you on the spot, but
yeah, mechanically.
I would say intelligibly, right? Because
Mm.
the mechanical influence of the bug spray is just that gust of air that comes out, or if it does come out. So if I spray it at a mosquito and it hits it and the mosquito bounces or the mosquito is pushed away, that's a mechanical influence. If I sprayed it, everything is calm, the air is perfectly still, and the mosquitoes fly away. Well, the inference is that they smell the bug spray. They don't like the bug spray, right? And they bounce. Right? Just like we understand the words we're speaking, the inference seems to be that the mosquito understands the spray and doesn't like it, right? So that's to say that, again, the inference that experiences appear in sentience in connection even with a mosquito, with a bumblebee, with a deer, it seems to be perfectly warranted. But what is not warranted is that there's any awareness of that awareness. There's no reason to think that the mosquito can think, I, the mosquito, don't like this bug spray, right? There's no reason to think that the deer can think, I, the deer, am scared of this hunk. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Maybe there's a lack of self-consciousness, but by the way of the Homo sapien, by the way of people, there's not only, or past a certain point of development, there's not only those intelligible experiences, such as a smell, such as a taste, such as a sound, but there's also the knowledge of that knowledge, right? I can see red, or red can occur in my experience, and I can also know that red occurs in my experience. So that's what we can, one connotation perhaps of the term self-consciousness that we can think about. And to the point, or the point would be then that when that self-consciousness arises, when it's not only that experiences occur in kind of just occur, right? The baby, cold, hot, hungry, tummy ache, not just that, but there's a consciousness of consciousness, for example, a knowledge of sentience. I think there's two main paths then that we can take. One path is that we can assume that just like I am sentient, and the proof of that is in the pudding. How do I know that I exist in this way? By the way of self-consciousness. Can I see it under a microscope? Can a lab test prove it? Can I see it through a telescope? Can a study show me? Can I do a poll or inventory? Right? Let me ask 15 people. No, right? It's just it is what it is. It's a fact, right? It's the proof again is in the pudding, so to speak. So I can either kind of take that fact and then assume that simultaneously, I'm also, not much. I'm also a creature. I'm also just a little worm-like entity, right? With the feeblest little bits of knowledge and love and power and desire and such. And I could then extrapolate from there and suppose that there's some sort of such absolute personality or absolute sentience or absolute knowledge or absolute love or absolute self-consciousness, something like this. That's one path I can take, right? And that path could be that which we would mean, broadly speaking, by the term idealism. And a different path that can then be taken at that point of self-consciousness would be to take the quality of self-consciousness, of self-existence, and apply it onto the visual and tangible aspects of our experience. So, for example, a stone, right? I can see it and I can touch it, and I can then, via sort of mental acrobatics, I can say that this stone, in its tangible and visual aspects, exists independently of any sort of sentience. It exists in and of its own self, for itself, by itself, and presumably then so does everything else that I suppose to be the world, such as the stars and the space and the atoms and the this and the that, right? Although how we get to atoms we could get to later, hopefully. That would be a different interpretation to take, and that would be one which we could call materialism, right? And just a note briefly, though we can hopefully get back to this, this does seem to concern tangible and visual aspects. Imagine if we thought that smell or taste was the fundamental reality which existed by itself. Nobody says that, right? There's division, primary, secondary qualities. So this self-existence purportedly applies to the primary qualities, but not the secondary qualities, not to taste and smell and color and such. Right? We can hopefully get to that, but sorry for talking too long. Go ahead.
Oh, no, yeah, that's an interesting distinction, but I don't know if, and I think you use intelligible reaction. I don't know if it was the word reaction would apply to uh
Intelligibility.
yeah, well, intelligibility is what the thing has, but the reaction to that thing will be was it intelligible reaction? So things have intelligibility, and thus they demand a response, an intelligible response to that, right? Like you said, the mosquito knows, in a sense, knows, not mechanically, that I think there's a distinction to be made, not mechanically, that the bug spray is bad for them. There's this type of
Doesn't like
intelligibility
it.
there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's a
So,
mechanical aspect of the bug spray, which is just that gust of air, and then there's
right,
the intangible aspect of the bug spray, which is that the mosquito doesn't like the
right,
bug
right.
spray, at least as far as we can infer from the observations reasonably, or
Yeah.
might infer.
So definitely, I mean, that there's the huge difference between those things that are alive for sure and those things that are mechanical. But I do think, which you do allude to, intelligibility or intelligent response does require, by its definition, this reflexiveness that you've been talking about, where it's you know that you know, and that's why we don't call animals really intelligent creatures. And you kind of allude to that, which is interesting. We can't, they automatically, in a sense, it is mechanical because a dog will always be territorial. A horse will always, characteristically in general, right? There's definitely exceptions. A horse will always be, what are the characteristics? Tough, brave, right? A cat will always be kind of like suspicious. So these things are, and they can't diverge from that. Or a robin's nest is always going to be the same, right? 50 years ago, the robin's nest is the same as today. So there's no progress, and that shows a lack of reflexiveness, which you alluded to, and that's, yeah, that's a profound. I have huge, because I teach, and a tremendous problem with some students. They don't want to distinguish the level of cognition or even the value of really, we could say, brute animals and intelligent animals, which are humans. Basically, they're the same. And we don't know that animals, or the animals basically have the same intelligent responses as humans. And that's absurd because of these effects that we see animals doing, right? No progress, especially in the moral realm, which is interesting. But I just wanted to make that point. So, Kant himself, which I find he's an interesting character. I do have some comments from people who watch this. They think that you're pretty Kantian. I don't know if you will accept that label or not. But Kant in the idealist world, he at least tried to. Um, Obviously, this isn't work according to the realist. This doesn't work. But he tried to kind of combined in empirical realism, we can say realism and idealism, to try to harmonize these two elements, which is really important. But the main question goes really, and maybe we're not going off a tangent, but we're going into profound territory, which is the principles of knowledge, the a posteriori, a priori question. That's the main thing. Like, what, knowing the thing, the knowledge, the basis of knowledge. Okay, yes, I'm built in the things, intelligibility, like where is intelligibility? Is intelligibility of things in the thing itself, and then I'm able to know it, or is there intelligibility kind of built into me where I'm able to apply the forms or the essences of that thing, kind of ordering it essentially. So the question goes kind of the principle of knowledge, like the principle of non-contradiction, for example, is an easy one. A thing can be and not be at the same time in the same sense. Is this something in reality that's extracted by us, by our minds, or is it something that we're built in, that's built into our minds? Or can it be a little bit of both? Are these mutually exclusive, these ideas? So this is basically where it comes down to trying to harmonize idealism with realism, which some don't believe it to work. It's either one or the other. You can't have both. But I think it's an interesting question here. So I don't know if you want to.
Yeah. Some good points. One I would say to what you referred to earlier, it is very, very easy, I think, to anthropomorphize all sorts of apparently intelligent entities. I mean, nowadays with AI like ChatGPT, this and that, as much as you know for sure that it's not intelligent, when you keep chatting with something that responds intelligently, you almost can't help yourself but posit that there is an intelligence there. At least it feels that way. And it feels a little strange to be rude or curse something that will intelligently, not that we should say bad words in general, but still something that appears to be intelligent. So when we see animals and we see dogs and they do apparently remember us and respond to us, it is so easy to entirely anthropomorphize them, to say that my dog is my child, is better than a child, is better than a human being. But let it be if that's what somebody needs. But critical analysis says otherwise. Even in the Homo sapien, self-consciousness does not appear to arise before a certain age. Oftentimes, it never arises. There needs to be a certain level of sophistication of civilization and such. So it doesn't seem that we have the right to pull ourselves out of the scheme of things and degrade ourselves, right? Like we think just because I'm a person, I have the right to talk poorly about people. People are nothing, really. The special ones are the birds and the dogs and the trees. Says who, right? We're a part of reality. Just because we can be self-conscious doesn't mean we're kind of outside of reality, right?
Right.
Like we're synthetic or artificial or something, and we can just knock ourselves and say that only the cute puppies are truly intelligent or whatnot, and we're not, right? So we're part of reality. There's no, I don't see any reason to think that the kind of self-consciousness and intelligence that we're capable of appears anywhere else, meaning among the animals or the insects. Anyway, to your second point, which could perhaps be framed as the relation between truth and thought, perhaps it could be said that thought is truth insofar as it is cognized and from the point of view of cognition. So taking something very simple, such as that 2 and 2 equals 4, why is that true? Well, the term two, or the sign or symbol two, right, however it's written or said, denotes a single group with a member and a member. And the other two denotes another group with a member and a member. Equals, plus means to combine them, kind of in our attention. And equals means what then do we have? And what we have is a member, a member, a member, and a member. In other words, shorthand for, right? It's what we can call tautology. It's true by necessity. If we apply it to material objects, it may or may not be applicable. For example, if you take a water drop and a water drop, it does equal one water drop if we combine them. So does that mean 1 + 1 is not always 2? No, 1 + 1 = 2 would not apply to the water drops because it presupposes, the equation does, that the members retain their individuality to some extent, right? If I combine a pencil and a pencil or a finger and a finger, they're still separate. It's just that they're in one group. So that's a correct materialization of the mathematization, we might say, of 1 + 1 = 2, right? 1 and 1, 2. They retain their individuality and they're also part of one group. So we say it's 2. So that's true, right? It is what it is. But is it floating somewhere in space, right? Like a platonic form, right? Is it in some kind of like chamber out there with different kinds of ideal forms? I personally don't know what that means. Instead, we might say that is how we would have to think about things. And yet, considered on its own, it's true. It's just true. It's truth that 1 + 1 is 2. But considered vis-a-vis the cognition, it can be called thought, meaning it needs to arise in a particular mind. And if I'm tired, it might be harder for me to add things up. Hopefully, not 1 + 1 = 2, but maybe. Right? It's something you need to learn. A baby doesn't know that past beneath a certain age. Excuse me, a kid doesn't know that. So it's something that needs to be, again, cogitated, which can be influenced by whatever influences cognitive processes, whether it's caffeine, again, sleep, drugs, alcohol, anything can influence those cognitions. But the cognitions ideally take us to truth, which itself is not cognition. 1 + 1 = 2 is not a brain process or whatever. It's nothing that can be influenced by nootropics or caffeine or alcohol, right? It's a reality, but it does need to be cognized. So again, we can perhaps say that truth or thought is truth from the perspective of cognition, and truth is actuality from the perspective of itself. Should such an abstraction be permitted? You want to hop in?
Yeah. So truth, and that's interesting because you do need that the subjective element, and with the cognition, you need a direct object. Cognition of what? You know what? You say, I know. What do you know? I just know. This doesn't make any sense. So you have to know what. So it's a transitive verb, right? I know things.
Object of your cognition.
Oh,
Yeah.
object of cognition. So that it's like there's that matrimony there between subject and object. It's kind of like, well, there's metaphysical truth. I won't get. I think I mentioned this in the prior video, but because we're referring to logical truth in judgments. So if I just say like window, is that true or not? Metaphysically, you can say yes if it exists, but logically that doesn't make any sense. Window, no, the window is 3 feet long. Then there's a judgment there, with a subject and a predicate, and you're able to assess that how based on the extramental reality. So there has to be a harmony there, a congruency, a adequatio, using a scholastic term, between the subject and the object. So yeah, that's I totally agree in that sense. And I like how you mentioned Plato. What's really fascinating is that Plato, I don't see him as an idealist. I see him as an ultra realist. But if you're an ultra realist, you can easily fall into idealism as two extremes meet. I mean, if you're going to say that the ideas I have of things, the forms, first exist in a reality that's like another world, immaterial, immutable reality, the world of the forms, then basically, and you know that, then that distinction becomes blurred, and then your knowledge becomes the reality. So ultra realism ultimately degrades to idealism, and that's why a lot of people wrongly interpret Plato. He was not an idealist at all, but it's a necessary consequence of extreme realism. If you're extremely realist, you fall into idealism. It just happens. Two extremes that meet. An extreme materialist will fall into an idealist too, like David Hume, when he got to the point of denying even the veracity of the senses, because sense experience is not a materialistic, tenet. It's like, how do you know the senses are? If you're just a materialist, how do you know the senses give you truth? Like that, you need an ideal, well, a transcendent principle. And that's the question, is like, where does rationality come from? So it would seem from what we're saying, and which the example of mathematics is that we are built for it, but it's something that it's a profound reality that our mind is able to extract So it seems like that you are defending more the Aristotelian principle, which I agree on, that we're pretty much born without ideas, and that though we're built with the capacity to know, the compax ray, the capacity of reality, but we're born with a blank slate, so that we are able to extract through the senses, right? But going beyond the senses, extract reality, and even mathematics is a very realist Aristotelian way of talking about the origins of mathematical knowledge from sense knowledge. So the senses being the gates, and that's it. The senses are very important. The idealists usually deny the veracity of the senses. They deny sense knowledge. So it really comes down to that. And basically, going back to that distinction between idealism and realism, maybe we could start going into the moral realm of this. And again, you can address the prior points that I said. When you speak, I take some notes so I can address your points, because sometimes it just escapes the mind. But morality now, virtue is rational activity. So we're called to live rationally. Like, we're to fulfill your function is what you were supposed to do. So again, this is a very scholastic realist view of morality, but it makes sense. A good knife, is a knife that cuts well. It's supposed to cut, right? A knife doesn't shoot. So you don't say a good knife and it shoots well. It doesn't make any sense. In the artificial world, we understand perfectly of artificial things that they have functions, and if they do that function, they're good. So basically, humans, because we're rational, we have to do that well to be good. So the question is rationality something that is built in us? Is something that comes merely from us? Or is rationality some type of, this is interesting, and I think we could say kind of both, is extracted from reality. Basically, living virtuously, what does that entail? That's the question that comes. Does it entail more of an internalistic view, where I'm an internalist and I have all the means of living virtuously, which is rationally, within me? Or is it an externalist view of where I cannot know within me, the principle's not within me, but I have to know from what's outside of me how to live rationally? But go ahead. I don't know if you want to take it down that path or address any of those other points, whatever you want
Yeah,
to.
yeah. Lots of great points, interesting stuff. Well, let's first of all maybe touch upon this. Again, the relationship of thought and truth. It seems untenable to say that such things as what we call truth and beauty and goodness, as they arise in our experience, would exist without such possibilities of experience. And yet, that is not to say that they're subjective in some way that is overly whimsical or voluntary. Something like beauty, right? Is it objective or is it subjective? What makes something beautiful? If we take the conventional trio of terms, the true, the good, and the beautiful, what's the relationship between for example, the true and the beautiful? One interpretation would have it that what we call beautiful correctly, when we call something correctly beautiful, it is a fit form for truth. Now, what does it mean that it's a fit form for truth? It's the form that truth yields or generates or creates should there be no other influences vis-a-vis the phenomenal. What does that mean? So, for example, let's take a Greek statue of a physique, of a male physique that the Greeks would consider to be beautiful. What makes that beautiful? Well, if we take an ideal such as, first of all, survival, life, vigor, strength, youth, and we allow that ideal, or those ideals rather, to influence an anatomy, and there's no other influences on the anatomy whatsoever, right? Quote unquote bad genes, as people say, right? Bad diet, all kinds of things, sedentary lifestyle. We might know a thing or two about that, but none of that. There's no other such influences. There's purely those ideals of again, strength and vigor and such. Well, the form that they will yield in principle, could be a form such as the Greek sculptors attempt to depict, and such as bodybuilders try to actually instantiate by the way of their actual real physiques, right? So, for example, a judge at a bodybuilding show, if he or she is fair, right? If he or she takes his or her personal predilections out of the picture and simply thinks which is the most beautiful physique, well, the person then would have to ask themselves these values of strength, these realities, these actualities of strength, of adaptation to stimuli, right? In which physique are they best instantiated? Are they best characterized? The fact is, for example, there's a muscle from here to here, which is called the bicep. And if that muscle is not exercised, it'll be small, it'll be weak. It will not be shaped by the ideal of strength. But if it is exercised properly, again, barring extraneous factors, bad genes, whatever it might be, then it will grow, right? And it can grow in a more or less shapely form, in a more or less balanced form. So basically, the physique can be a product of this ideal of adaptation to stimuli of strength, which is in line with, for example, our innate desires to live, right? To have stability, to have security, to have everlasting kind of an everlasting hold on life. And the appearance, which we call a well-built physique, then is the appearance of that truth. This argument will go at least. And that's why we call it beautiful. So again, beauty can be considered to be a fit form for truth, right? Let's take a book. You got some beautiful books there in the background. How come it would be weird, it would be strange if a book is great, right? It's really truthful, it's really sound and solid in its content, and yet the binding is flimsy and cheap. The pages are thin and see-through. Wouldn't that be strange? It would be, right? It's strange. So not just strange. It's obviously like you're saving money, but it's just not, it's icky. It's like, nah, I don't want this book, this 2 cents paperback when it's such a great text. Well, what's in line with what we're arguing now? Beauty being a fit form for the true. Well, something that's true is everlasting, even something as simple as 2 + 2. In nature, what is more reminiscent of that which is everlasting? Well, perhaps something like granite, right? Like stone, it's immovable, right? Just like truth is immovable. Relative to any person's lifetime, it might as well be eternal, right? Because thousands of generations go by, the same cliff, for example, right? So something that is more in that direction of what we identify in nature as a form for truth. When applied to a book, we're like, that's a quality book, right? A solid, hard binding, right? Good, thick pages, right? It's not going to fall apart. And we call that a beautiful book, a beautiful binding, because the fit form for what the book hopefully depicts, which is truth, if it is a truthful book. Now, if that fine binding is applied to a trashy book that is full of falsehood, right? That is full of nonsense. You open it up, it says 2 + 2 is 5. The sky is down. It's a bunch of nonsense. And then the binding is great. That would also be a strange thing, right? It would also be a contrast because the form is not representative of the truth. So we're getting a little long-winded here about beauty, but the point would be that beauty demands a cognizer, right? What does it mean to say that a landscape is beautiful for itself? A book is beautiful for itself. A body is beautiful relative to, the camera lens. What does that mean? It requires a cognizer. It requires somebody able to be influenced by intelligible stimuli, to our prior point. But that's not to say that it's made up, right? It's not to say that I can take any form and make it a fit form for beauty, right? A beautiful home is one such that is the visibility of, say, the idea of home, of security, of stability, of comfort. If what I call a beautiful home is, a vine in the rainforest that swings and is about to break, and I say, oh, this is my home. I live on here and it's so beautiful. That's not true, right? That's me. I can use that word like that to make and whatever, but that's not sound, right? If I get up on the bodybuilding stage and I'm, a bit hefty and I haven't chiseled down my body fat, I haven't fleshed out all of my different muscles, and somebody says, you're perfectly beautiful. That's false because it's not the ideal form of the truth here. The argument would go. So we would say minds are needed to appreciate the values, beauty, truth, goodness. But it doesn't mean that the values are made up. It doesn't mean that I can verbally, mishmash or whatever different terms and it'll be so. This is beautiful and this is just randomly, whatever I feel like, right? This is beautiful. this is good. Let me punch you in the face, and that's good. 2 + 2 is 5. No, that's true. No, this is just me running my mouth and saying empty nonsense. Right. So it's subjectively, we could say objective. We can hop in, or I could transition to your other points. That was a little bit too
No,
too
I just
long.
want to say that, I mean, I think you're right, but I'll just take more of the realist position of that, because when you mentioned these ontological properties, the transcendentals, also known as beauty, truth, and goodness, these have to be in reality somehow, as for us to call them, for us to even understand what we mean, there has to be some objective reality to that. So really, the question is, at least traditionally with realists, is that beauty exists in reality, but the characteristics of beauty are not easy to ascertain. Like they're different. There's, the discrepancies in views of, like St. Thomas would say, beauty's in things, as a property of things, and it's discovered. So why can't I see beauty? It's not a problem with a thing, it's a problem with the perceiver. The perceiver cannot perceive beauty because the perceiver is darkened, the will's darkened, the intellect is darkened because of sin, basically. And this even applies to people. So the beauty in people, objectively, which is interesting. So basically, Thomas Aquinas talks about proportionality being an aspect of beauty, proportionality, integrality, right? If you're missing half of your face, that's considered not beautiful. If there's a lack of proportionality, going to the first point, lack, not beauty. And I think the last one was more colorfulness. I don't know if that's the right English translation. Colorful was more colorful, as opposed to what's, just black and white is more beautiful. So I forgot what the word was. So basically it's those colorfulness, integrity, which means it has all the parts that are due to it, and proportionality. So if someone has like one eye bigger than the other, right, that's considered not beautiful, objectively. But this notion of objective is interesting when we go to morality, because objective we tend to think of it as extramental, but the idealists, especially with Kant, because Kant, again, trying to do a synthesis, this is what we want to do. We want to synthesize in a sound, orthodox way. And Catholicism, right, definitely synthesizes in a more orthodox way tremendously. Kant is a problem. He synthesizes in the wrong way, I would say. So talking about objective for him, it means that everyone's built with it. So now going to moral beauty, we could make that. That's a really great transition from beauty to moral beauty. Where is moral beauty? Like where is the commands of morality? Like why should I? Where the shoulds come from, right? Like the should. Is it this command essentially? Is it a command that I receive extramentally? Is it intramental? Is it built into me, or is it just from God, basically? That's one of the questions. We may not address that because this is a huge topic, dealing with morality. I think we just kind of want to talk about the virtue, or how would we live, the moral consequences of idealism and realism, but in concrete living, like in virtuous living, for example, like what would a realist believe and what would idealists believe, without kind of going into, the basis of morality itself. But go ahead, you wanted to, I
Yeah,
think,
yeah.
just the other.
Yeah. Yeah, we can jump straight into that. There's a lot of interesting side topics there, but keeping on that main path, hopefully. So to tie back to what was said at the beginning, right? When we come to self-consciousness, we can either, let's really try to get down to that point, right? Part and parcel of self-consciousness means that as far as one can tell, the proof that one exists, that I exist, is again in the pudding, right? Again, let's say that already having attained to self-consciousness, an individual is in the dark, in a sensory deprivation tank, and neither sees, nor smells, nor touches, nor tastes. Do we miss anything here? Right? Would the person still know that he or she exists?
Oh yeah.
Right. So the proof is in the pudding. I don't need a laboratory test to tell me that I exist. I may need a laboratory test to tell me if I have, the latest virus or not, or if I have the whatever it might be, a paternity test. But I don't need such a test that tell me that I exist. I exist because that's a function of self-consciousness, of existing. So should a person attain to self-consciousness, which again, we speculate animals cannot do, and beneath a certain maturational point, a person cannot do. Should a person so do, he or she can suppose that, again, why should I limit this principle of self-existence, of self-consciousness, right, of mind? Why should it be limited to the tiny little dot that I am now? For one, right, let's say that right now I'm 20. I can think back to when I was 10. I had a different mind, right? I had a different being in some way. I'm 20 or I'm 30 now. Think back to when I was 20. So even by the way of my own immediate self, there's so much change possible. So why would I suppose that the uppermost cap or limit of personality, of intelligence, of goodness, of truth, of beauty is with my present self at its present developmental point? You get what I'm saying? Extreme self-centeredness, basically. That's silly. I mean, why? So I suppose that there's an infinite road or highway ahead, which I could travel and transcend my present self, right? I can transcend my animality, perhaps. I can work to defeat my creaturehood, right? I can be more than just this center wherein impulses and desires bubble up, right? I want and I need and I'm hungry and I'm thirsty. I think about anybody reduced to that state, right? A couple of days without eating, a day without drinking, a couple of days without sleep. What am I? How do I experience myself as? Versus now I'm well rested and I've eaten and I've hydrated and I've had my multivitamin and I feel good and I've had maybe some coffee if I drink coffee. Now it's a whole different story, right? And now instead of, let's say, being focused on something very self-centered, I have a pimple, I'm losing my hair, I've gained weight, I'm this and that. Instead of being focused on that, I'm focused on ideas and ideals. I'm focused on serving people. I'm focused on the rapture of beauty, something like this, right? Now we say that there's this, you get what I'm saying? Even within the course of a few days, I'm here, right? I'm just a creature, right? And then I'm here. I'm a mind, right? I'm a capacity of cognition, consciousness, of knowledge, all kinds of things. So one interpretation of idealism that relates to virtue and ethics would be to say that it is a fact that by the way of the Homo sapien, such possibilities of personality are not finite. Right? There will never come a day when a person that is able to develop him or herself will reach a dead end and say, you know what, there's no more to go. I know everything. I'm maxed. I'm filled to the cap, with love and knowledge and goodness and beauty, and that's it. And I'm just gonna sit back and relax. That would be failure, right? That would not be reality. There's an infinite road, right? There's no end. So that's one interpretation, and then virtue would be would concern the question of what will lead me down the good path, right? What is the way and the life that will lead me to my own true life, that will permit me to overcome my creaturehood and my animality and my selfishness, my alienation from everybody, my hatred of others, my bitterness, my anger, my pathologies, all these kinds of things, right? What is, again, the way forward? What is the way to my own good, to your good, to the good of all in one? That's one then view of life. And then obviously all kinds of petty concerns get put on the back burner. Obviously one needs to eat and drink and all kinds of things and to make a profit. But if I have before me the possibilities, again, of true life and true goodness, and then I have some petty concern, let me get this last microwave. Let me merge into traffic before you, right? Let me backstab my colleagues so that I get promoted before them. Which one would I choose, right? In principle. So that's one kind of ethical vision that has been traditionally associated with idealism. With materialism, if I take the step, remember, we hit that self-consciousness is fork in the road. I take that one path that we just described, now I go the other path. I say that objects are the truly existent realities, right? I ascribe verbally, conceptually, my own self-existence, right? I only know for sure that I exist in the capacity of self-consciousness, objects seem to appear to me, right? I have a dream and I dream up the bridge and the mountain, all kinds of things, right? But I understand that those are kind of modifications of, we might say mind, whatever we would say, but they don't self-exist. Right? That's a nonsensical idea. What does that even mean? They don't exist to and for themselves. Only I can exist to and for myself. But if I ascribe that self-existence to objects, and I suppose myself to be another such object, right? Here's there's the bird, and there's the tree, and there's one person, another person, and here's that other person. We're all at odds with each other. There's one microwave and five objects, people that want to grab it, right? There's one spot in traffic, and I have to honk and go crazy because that other object over there wants to go in front of me. Right? Basically, I operate from a position of self-centeredness, from a self-will, right, which can easily become self-idolatry. I make myself that highest object in my own reality. And then kind of the ethics of that is something like kill or be killed, right? The survival of the fittest, whatever will aggrandize me the most, whatever is transactionally useful that will lead to me getting something materially beneficent as I conceive it, more profit, more things, something like this. So we see these two vastly, eventually, they might begin kind of close, but eventually they really, really diverge. These two ethical visions of life that can be tied in with these two big ways of seeing reality. Again, that which has been called or can be called idealism. It's just a name, right? People can mean all kinds of things by that, but we could name it like that. And also that which could be named materialism. But again, that term could refer to whatever, including simply consumer habits. Right. And so we can use those X and Y, right? We can say, but we can also use those names.
Yeah, I mean, idealist is a good thing outside of philosophically speaking, like colloquially, oh, he's an idealist, that's good.
There's different connotations, right? Like I'm an
Yeah.
idealist in my head. We don't mean that. We mean the philosophical here.
So that distinction you made between idealism and materialism is good. I mean, I think true realism has to harmonize both elements. Because on the one side, the idealist, philosophical idealism, right? If you're living based on the principle of immanence, it's called, or internalism, where the danger of that is loving abstractions. So you love abstractions, like I love humanity, right? But you don't really care for individual humans. You see, you love definitions, but your love is a very much abstract metaphysical love, which is not bad. I'm not saying it's bad, but it's definitely short. It's not going to bring you into the true moral realm. It's going to enclose you into yourself. So I mean, say it's not bad. It's incomplete, right? It's incomplete. We do have to love the abstract, but the abstract uh has to come from the concrete and bring us back to the concrete. So if we love humanity, and this is where we get the synthesis with materialism, that's what true realism, I would say, is idealism synthesized with materialism. We have to love the concretes. The danger of materialism, though, is that and this is very much, you can see this kind of on political lines, like extreme conservatives can be very idealistic, where you love certain ideals, certain principles, right? You love structure, you love logic, you love laws, which is good. But with the extreme kind of liberals, you love concretes, and you don't even care about definitions. You just love concrete things. And I love that individually, there's no truth, right? You're just loving individuals as individuals, qua individuals, and there's no definition of love. It's just a certain benevolence towards concrete realities, because that's the only reality that exists. So there's these two dangers that you have, morally speaking, to live the abstract merely or to live the concrete merely, which again is an insufficient love, which is not true love. Love has to be the integration, true realism, of both. The abstract is the motivator of the loving of the concrete. It's like I love, and that's very important, because love has to be principle based. I love humans as humans, right? I love this person because of this abstract idea you have of this person based on reality, right? So it's kind of like the concrete and abstract are feeding each other. There has to be that connection. There's the huge danger today, and this is the basis of the crisis we're living in the church, the crisis we're living philosophically, is the divorce of the abstract from the concrete. So people say, oh, I believe this, and this is hypocrisy, right? Hypocrisy. We understand this as hypocrisy. I believe this, but I do this. It's the opposite. It's like, wait a minute, you have to do what you believe, right? You can't have that schizophrenia in you. It won't last long. One of them have to conform. You can't do that. You can't. Well, nowadays people are, in a very manipulative, astute way, are able to live hypocrisy for a long time. But you have to harmonize one or the other. So you have beliefs, abstract beliefs, and then concrete actions. There has to be a relationship between the two. So this is the deficiency of idealism and materialism, which in morality would be truly detrimental if you were taking him the extreme position. Now with Kant, what I like about Kant is that he's an idealist, yes, but he tries to make what is internal objective. So like it's universal that we have a moral sense. It's universal that we are supposed to love the concretes. Is universal. So we're even though it's internal, it's built into every person. So you get confused because objective doesn't mean extramental. Objective means it's still a priori in us, but it's built into us, this love. So that's how he puts more emphasis on the abstract, of course, and the a priori. And in that sense, he's an idealist. But he does talk about this morality being universal, and from there we apply that to the concretes, basically. So, what I think that's basically it. We have to have this harmony of both, right? Love, but love based on a animating principle that's abstract. Like, what is the definition of love? Let's start from there, right? Like, we have to know what love is. Love is not, whatever, some type of good feeling, subjective feeling towards someone. There has to be, well, what love is. What am I loving? Like, what is this? Why is this good? Or is it just something that causes me pleasure? So there has to be abstract knowledge as the animator for love of concrete things. And I think that's how we can harmonize it in the end. But I'll give you the last word because it's been a long but very substantial video. I think it's been pretty good. But I'll give you the last word. I don't want to extend too much. We could do another video much similar to these topics,
Yeah.
these high topics we address. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, some great points and well said. Really interesting stuff. Yeah, we cover a couple things and wrap it up. One, I'd say there's so many interpretations of Kant given his complexity, at least of his writings, meaning it's a lot of muddle in the opinion of many people. But one interpretation that many have found useful would be that Kant consigned cognition and a sense of morality and such to ourself, right? But then he cleaved ourself, our mind, off of what he's supposed to be the in itself or objective reality, right? So we create, presumably, we're equipped with a priori means with which we perceive, or by the way of which we perceive something like this, but they're only consigned to, and they only concern our subjective experiences, and there's a world out there, things in themselves which we can never at all apprehend, and such. That has been criticized plenty of times. There doesn't seem to be room to say that there's a thing in itself, and certain sorts of sophisticated idealism would certainly say that the human mind is equipped to interface with reality, and that we're certainly attuned to reality. And once we find something out, like that 2 + 2 is 4, there's no sense and there's no room to say that there's an in itself toneness or fourness which we cannot apprehend, that these are just quote unquote mental rules. No, this is probably the structure of reality, right? That the principle of non-contradiction is mental, but out there somewhere it doesn't apply, right? That's many critiques have kind of busted that and said that that's not so. Another point that you brought up is that a person can be pulled along by ideals, which touches upon what we were saying about intelligible influence, right? If I want to get one billiard ball to strike the other billiard ball, there's no way that I can do so by persuading one of the billiard balls that it's a good idea to do it, or that it'll self-realize when it collides into the other billiard ball, or anything like that. I think that's because they have what we can call, again, rightly or not, mechanical influence only. One billiard ball hits another billiard ball, the second one will move unless it can't, somebody glued it or something as a prank or cheating in a pool. But it only has mechanical influence. We're not influenced like that. We can hear about, or not only like that. Somebody can shove us, and then we're also influenced like that. That's just our bodies. Ourselves, we're influenced intelligibly. Ultimately, the environment can be influenced mechanically, right? I didn't know that you put in some sort of kind of neurochemical type of thing in my drink, and now I'm feeling strange. So that environment that I'm operating in can be influenced, quote unquote, mechanically. But myself, I'm influenced intelligibly. For example, again, I hear of an ideal, the ideal of the A-list celebrity. So I think, okay, let me work backwards. How do I get there? Well, maybe I need to, be a designer for the other celebrity, and I need to, do their hair and makeup and their wardrobe, and maybe they're gonna take me out to the clubs and this and that, and then I myself will be a celebrity because the paparazzi will catch me. So this ideal captures my attention, right? An ideal of wealth, an ideal of fame, an ideal of health, of a physique, of power, of strength, whatever it might be. And then I can be moved by it, toward it. That's not a mechanical influence as subsists by the way of billiard balls. That's an intelligible influence. Obviously, it demands an intelligence such as what we call ourself. So that's a great point.
Right.
Now, speaking, the last thing we can touch upon would be love, right? And I think maybe one way to put it would be that you said, right, there needs to be the abstract and there needs to be the concrete. There needs to be the capacity to love, and then it needs particular realities, living lives to love, right? So, for example, a magnet needs to be a magnet, and then whatever metal comes by it, it'll push, or it'll attract other metals. It can push away depending on the polarities, right? This and that. So just so I need to have the capacity to love. And then that love should encompass my immediate individuality, my mind, my body, my psychology, and also all other individualities that come within a sufficiently close vicinity of me. I either do or I don't have the capacity to love, it does seem. Right? We sometimes confuse love with attachment, animal attachment, and that is possible selectively. Just like a dog can be attached only to its owner and it'll bark at everybody else. The owner might say, oh, my dog loves me. Again, we don't have to offend anybody, but maybe that's the wrong word. The dog is attached to me because it understands the food comes from me. This is the owner, this and that. If the dog was capable of love, right, then that love would be equal, and its impact would vary depending on the proximity of someone to. Moving on, forget the dog. That's to the dog. If I can love, right,
Exactly.
going too far with that metaphor or analogy, if I'm able to love, then the influence of my love should encompass any individualities that come within its vicinity. Again, the immediate, and we can define love perhaps as, say, willing the good, willing the weal, W-E-A-L, the good of a being such that can strive towards good, right? Which is potentially self-conscious being. If I'm able to will the good of others, starts with myself, right? If I should love myself, and I should do what
Right.
it takes to not become dilapidated and degraded and fall into the dark depths of alcoholism and drug addiction and all kinds of addictions and crime and all kinds of things, right? I love myself in this way, not because I'm self-centered, hopefully, right? And I want to see how my dress or my suit is looking, how my hair is looking. That's fine, but that's different because I will my own good, right? I want to be humble. I want to be upright. I want to think correctly. I want to do right by the way of myself. I think that's what we can mean by love, right? It affects my immediate individuality, but then it also should affect the individualities that are within my life, right? I can only hold the door open for the person that is, what is it, behind me, right? Or in front. Behind me, probably, right? They're walking behind me, right? I can't hold the door open for the person on the other continent, right? Sometimes people say, I heard one speaker on the internet say that he once told his mother that, oh, your love is not real because if you had a different child, then you would love him. You only love me because I'm my child. Well, because I'm because I'm your child. Well, duh, right? You love your own children because if you have love for children, it's the children that are yours that you're going to love. I had a teacher. Let's say I'm looking for a teaching gig. First of all, I have to love to teach. I have to love youth. I have to love students, right? I have to have a love for my subject. Then I get a good gig, and make sure the pay is good, the healthcare is good, all that fine. But next, my love is then affecting my students in my classroom.
Right.
What does it mean? So, well, why doesn't it affect the other students? Well, because they're the other students. They're not my students. My students, right? That if I moved into a different classroom, then my love will affect the other students, hopefully, right? It's like a magnet. Next to this piece of metal, it's drawing it here. Next to the other piece of metal, it's drawing it there. The
That's
capacity to will the good is one thing. And then where it's applied, it depends, right? It's who's behind me. That's the person I can hold the door open. Who am I driving next to? That's the person I can drive nicely relative to. Who's checking out of the grocery store? That's the person I can say please and thank you to. Who are my kids? That's the kids that I ought to love, right? Who are my students? That's the students I need to love. Who's my spouse? That's the spouse I need to love, right? So it's a mix, like you said, of the abstract, right, of a impersonal capacity, but it can only be applied personally. It can't be applied in the abstract. Oh, I love humanity, but I'm going to let my family starve,
right.
right? I love humanity,
Which is
that
like
kind of
Karl
thing.
Marx. It's like crazy,
Yeah,
like the very communistic dedication to the abstract, but the total forgetfulness of the individual, even though they promote the individual, but in the abstract. So it's
yeah,
communism or collectivism, which is similar. Yeah, very good. I think you ended on the Christian principle, the second love of God, the second greatest commandment, which is love of neighbor, love others as yourself. So that fundamental primordial experience of love that you have with yourself, that you experience that, and that is kind of projected on others. But yeah, you can't love others if you don't love yourself, and that I think is I mean, there's a lot that you said there, but I wish we could go on, but we're over an hour. I do want to make this video like attractive to people. Sometimes if you see like a 2 hour videos and people are like, oh, I don't know
they
if
won't love it, man.
I
They
don't know
gotta
if I
love
should
it.
listen to this.
Yeah.
But but no, this was very substantive, very substantial conversation, and I think we should continue a similar, if not the same topic in the next one. All right, guys. So up till until next time, we'll see you. God bless you all. Take care.